Last time on the Salty Siren, we talked about the beginnings of Ramage's Rampage and the perfect storm of events that led to one of the most famous naval events of World War II. We talked about the origins of the USS Parch, as well as her commander, Ramage, and all of the various modifications that had been made to the Balao class of submarines. We touched briefly on the Mark IV and Mark 14 torpedoes, as well as all of the fixes that took place just in time for the Parch's deployment into the Pacific. Where we last left off, the Parch was heading towards a detected convoy of merchant vessels, the events that would later become known as Ramage's Rampage.
O'er the wild windy sea, I can hear her calling to me. So let's heave away, haul away, and fill our eyes with the shore. Calls to friends, ale and light, and a tale to brighten the night. So heave away, haul away, and heed the siren song.
All right, so Hammerhead came up on this large convoy around midnight between July 28th and 29th, and the U.S. Navy designated it Convoy MI-11. From the sort of initial data that Hammerhead was able to send back, they got that there were 17 merchant vessels, 6 escort vessels of significant size, primarily destroyers, as well as a decent contingent of much smaller gunboats and like smaller sort of military craft.
We'll send boats with guns. Gunboats.
Yeah, it's basically, it was a decent-sized convoy, but the biggest thing that, and I wasn't able to find if Hammerhead noticed this initially or if they just discovered it through the events that followed, but there were sort of 4 main ships on it that were identified as primary targets. So there was the Fuso Maru and the Yoshino Maru, both of which were troop transports and were loaded with 5,000 troops each, along with the Ogura Maru and the Koe Maru, which were huge fuel tankers that were carrying vital supplies to the Japanese front lines. Now, due to the sort of like wolf pack formation, Hammerhead was moving in from the west, and due to the kind of rough seas conditions at the time and just general interference, they sent the wrong coordinates for where this convoy was.
And just to recap, the wolf pack kind of formation was just the submarines are kind of in the same general area, and then they just start blasting.
Right. They move in a pretty loose formation to hopefully kind of like catch any potential ones. Once something pops up on their radar, they report it, decide if it's worth going after, and then the wolf pack closes in.
Okay.
And one of the benefits of that is that as happened here, so Hammerhead relays the wrong coordinates, but realizes that they've done it and corrects it a little bit later. But Hammerhead makes an attack run and claims 1 vessel sunk. No specifics really on which one they hit, but it wasn't one of the 4 main targets. So Steelhead, being further away and on the eastern side, comes in from the other direction. And this was kind of the power of the wolf pack, is like a merchant convoy would get hit by a submarine and they'd freak out and start hunting for that one submarine, and then would get hit from a completely different direction that they weren't prepared for at all by another submarine. And so usually there was sort of like an initial ambush and then subsequent ambushes that made it really hard to respond to. But a few hours later, Steelhead came in from the east and claimed a few hits, but no sinkage on both of the fuel carriers, as well as successfully sinking 2 lesser vessels. I guess I could have worded that better, but they hit both the fuel carriers but didn't sink them, and then they sunk 2 smaller merchant vessels. Now, Steelhead slips beneath the waves and gets out of dodge. But in the wake of Steelhead's attack, which was significantly more destructive than Hammerhead's, the escort vessels all sort of fan out in like a net trying to find Steelhead and Hammerhead. And Parsh comes sailing up and detects the like spreading net of escort ships, and so pulls into what I'd call a 360-degree turn, where they basically turn off and out and around and basically form a circle, kind of coming back, hoping to dodge this net of escort vessels, which they successfully do. They slip right in between them, and they're thinking, great, we're going to be like right in the perfect area to start an attack. But unbeknownst to them, and undetected because they had pulled such a wide turn to avoid the destroyer net, they hadn't detected that the merchant convoy had begun taking evasive maneuvers and altering their path, and that they had turned directly into the path of USS Parsh.
Okay.
So, with this, and all of this partially happening because of the harsh surface conditions and the vibrating periscopes of the Balao class of submarine, they surface, and Ramage immediately notices that they are basically just in the center of the entire convoy.
Oh, and no.
When later interviewed about his initial thoughts upon realizing what was happening, Ramage simply said, "I got mad." And mad he did indeed get.
Yeah.
So, Ramage commanded USS Parsh to surface and to ready all surface weapons as well as torpedo tubes. In another miraculous moment, the Parsh surfaced less than 500 yards from the bow of one of the merchant vessels, which they were headed into a straight-on collision course. Realizing that they were potentially going to be rammed, they slammed the rudder full rightward and were so close to each other that the surface gun crews of both vessels screamed insults at each other.
But they didn't shoot at each other?
I mean, it was one of those things where, like, I'm sure they were shooting at each other, but I just loved the anecdote that they were so close that they could, like, hear and understand each other, like, calling each other motherfuckers. Like, it's just crazy. Some of the sailors were saying, like, oh, we came within 10 yards of that merchant ship, and it's like, knowing sailors and their tendency to exaggerate, I don't really buy that. But still, they cut it pretty close.
Sure.
And so, coming about, pulling another sort of 270-degree turn, USS Parsh commences her first attack run. As we mentioned previously, I believe, the Balao class had 6 fore torpedo tubes, or forward-facing, and 4 aft, or rear-facing, which was kind of cool because it meant that it could kind of fire from both directions and even like at angles from forward and backwards.
Also, that's just a lot more torpedoes than I expected there to be.
Yeah, I mean, the Balao class was the biggest submarine of the Second World War. Like, it was definitely a big boy.
Don't know what you heard, but I'm the biggest sub.
But pulling 270 degrees, and now with her nose facing the port side of the merchant vessel that they dodged, they fired 2 of the forward torpedo tubes, officially beginning the attack at 3:56 in the morning. So another thing to note, it is like still pitch black. So the merchant vessel took evasive action as soon as they saw the torps in the water, steering hard to port and successfully dodging them. But in yet another part of this perfect storm of events, the merchant vessel had turned and completely blocked a destroyer that was heading straight for the USS Parsh, which forced the destroyer to have to pull off and basically do a full 360-degree turn before it could begin pursuing the submarine again. So, this bought Ramage and the USS Parsh very, very valuable time, and they would use it well. So, darting in between the turning vessel and the following ship in the column, the USS Parsh was now officially in between the 2 lines of the convoy, and enemy vessels had sort of formed this corridor, basically, down either side. And at 4:02, the Parsh fired one of her rear torpedoes at the original vessel, with a subsequent explosion and hit claimed shortly after. Now again, it's like completely pitch black, and so the merchant ships and any sort of escort gunboats are throwing up flares, and machine gun fire is just like raking across the water. Merchant vessel defensive turrets and larger guns, like basically muzzle flash and flares were the only thing that either side had to see by. So the merchant ships were really just sending up so many flares, but with how black the sea was, tons of shots went wide and hit friendly vessels, or in the confusion, they thought that friendly vessels were the submarine and purposefully targeted it. So it was just pure chaos.
Oh dear. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how hard I would shit my pants if it was the middle of the night, and someone told me there was a sub in the water. You know, just every man for himself, or every ship for himself, I guess.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, especially like, at least in Napoleonic sailing times, there was generally a sort of feeling among the Navy back then that merchants were incredibly incompetent sailors, at least compared to military sailors. Now, whether that's true or not, I really couldn't tell you, but I imagine that a significant amount of the chaos was happening just because, like, the merchants really weren't trained super well on, like, the things you would be trained on with like a military vessel, like correctly identifying like friendly from enemy vessels, especially because they would expect like a sub attack to come from the outside. So it's like, yeah, just shoot where the military vessels are shooting. But because Parsh had gotten into the convoy, the military vessels could not get in. Like, it was basically just, I would say bull in a china shop, but that one episode of Mythbusters proved that they wouldn't actually fuck it up that bad. But it was just pure chaos. So after sort of getting through, firing that rear torpedo and hitting the original vessel, or at least thinking that they hit the original vessel, Ramage misidentified two of the central convoy ships as aircraft carriers due to their long, flat profiles on the water, and immediately said, we've got to prioritize those. And so they set in to attack. But in another stroke of luck, Ramage had kind of accidentally found the two oil tankers.
Yeah.
Arguably the two most important targets in the entire convoy. So at 4:07 a.m., they launched the remaining 4 forward torpedoes at the Koei Maru. 4 resounding explosions, and the torpedoes just tore the ship apart. Like, literally, she was sunk before the battle even ended. So,
oh my.
Like, they really did a number on it. But that earned the USS Parsh her first bit of tonnage for the event. But now completely out of forward torpedoes, the USS Parsh pulled off and brought the remaining 3 rear tubes to bear on the Agura Maru, the other oil tanker. The remaining 3 got fired off in pretty rapid succession, with 2 of the shots hitting in the very front of the ship and the third one missing. But because they hit the front, it basically just made it a sitting duck. Because one of the things with torpedoes is that when they successfully rupture the hull, it creates a massive amount of drag on the ship under the water. So, like, oftentimes, if it was like a military vessel, or even if they were just hit in a different spot, if you were hit on one side, you would have to purposefully flood the other side of the ship just to balance it out. And even then, the rudder would have to be basically angled to compensate for the increased drag on just one side of the ship. But unfortunately for the Agura Maru, these hit in the front. So that meant that if it wanted to move forward at all, it was just forcing water into its lower components, and she began to list pretty heavily towards the front of the vessel and was reduced to a speed of 2 knots.
Oh man.
So
isn't that the speed of a submerged sub with, like, you're breaking down the speeds?
Right. I believe that was like the sustaining speed of... That was if the Balao class wanted to last 48 hours underwater without coming up for air. They had to go at 2 knots.
Okay.
So they're like barely moving, basically. Right. But knowing that there was more to be done, Ramage immediately commanded the torpedo crews to rearm and confirmed that they would not be submerging to do this, which was standard procedure. You pretty much fire all your torpedoes, you pull off, and rearm if necessary, because it takes a long time.
Yeah, it's a big old thing you gotta put in the tube.
But he effectively said, we don't have time to do that, just load the tubes. And so they slowed a bit and pulled kind of to the center between the two rows of vessels, and the USS Parsh's deck guns did their best, just roaring, trying to buy time for the torpedo crews below. 2 torpedoes slammed home into their tubes at 4:16 a.m. and were immediately fired at the Dakar Maru, another merchant vessel that happened to cross in front of the sub as the torpedoes were loaded. Both torpedoes found their mark, and the Dakar Maru exploded, seemingly having hit some sort of fuel reserve or something, and the power immediately failed. So all the lights went off, the engine shut down, and it began sinking beneath the waves.
Oh, God.
That was the second vessel credited to the Parsh. Then, wheeling around again to bring the forward tubes to bear on the damaged Aguru Maru, Parsh was once again saved just by complete chance. The Agura had actually decently sized cannon. I couldn't find exact specifications on it because, as you'll soon see, it's currently beneath the waves. But said cannon was now lifted so high into the air because of her forward compartments flooding that it couldn't aim down far enough to actually hit USS Parsh as it approached. It didn't have enough gun depression to actually aim at them. So, wanting to make sure that they sunk what they still believe to be an aircraft carrier, they fired 3 torpedoes again as soon as they were loaded at 4:21, all 3 finding their mark and causing the vessel to quickly sink. So, at this point, the Parsh pretty much weaves past the now sinking wreckage of the Agura and is kind of outside of the convoy corridor. Unfortunately, they're again in the position where they just have to reload. That's what they're stuck doing. But because just by the nature of kind of how ships work, they had to slip out through there. They couldn't turn around quick enough to stay in the column. They immediately started getting lit the fuck up by escort ships.
Yeah.
So, Ramage actually ordered the bridge cleared of everything but the most essential personnel because they were just constantly getting hit with varying munitions from gunboats. Destroyers were firing shots at them. Pretty much everything. And despite this, despite constantly hearing shells ricochet off the deck and 50 cal rounds peppering the outside of the ship, the torpedo rooms were just keeping on at a fever pitch, finally allowing 2 torpedoes to be loaded again into the forward tubes. Now at this point, the Parsh pulls slightly off and begins to aim at the Yoshino Maru, one of the troop transports. And you can't really blame the guy at this point, but Ramage kind of tunnel visioned. He was so set on making sure that these torpedoes hit their mark that he took quite a while to realize that the crew that was still around on the deck and still sort of observing were yelling about an incoming ship. They started getting more panicked and were yelling warnings of an incoming ram. And the Kazan Maru, a converted gunboat, had decided that its various guns that it had couldn't deal enough damage, and so was just going to slam into the side of the Parsh.
They decided to revert to the old ways.
Pretty much ramming, bringing it back. But Ramage was still trying to line up this shot, and finally gave the order to pull off and to go full ahead just in time for the Kazan Maru to miss their tail. They're quoted as having missed by less than 50 yards.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
It is pretty close. And it would have been even closer if it were not for the helmsman, Chet Stanton, who, hearing the crew yelling about an incoming ram and knowing that it would take some time for the engines to actually respond, he actually ordered the full ahead a good, few seconds before Ramage did. So
it was like, hey, hey, officer, hey, boss, let me take this one.
I mean, the balls on the dude, because it is technically disobeying the chain of command.
Right.
He was like, okay, fuck this, we're not getting rammed, and just slammed the throttle forward. And so by the time that Ramage was like, okay, yeah, full ahead, the engines pretty much immediately responded because they'd actually been given the order a ways before that.
Yeah.
But Parsh pulls off successfully and rounds on the Yoshino Maru. At this point, Parsh lines herself up so that they're pretty much heading straight for each other. The morning dawn's beginning to creep in at this point, and continuing escort fire is lighting them up as much as possible. But Parsh dumps the 3 loaded forward tubes, and 2 of them slam directly into the nose of the Yoshino. This time, it seems like they blew big enough holes that it doesn't move at all and grinds to a complete halt.
Oh.
Parsh is then able to swerve off and avoid the ship. Again, just in time, loading 2 rear-facing tubes and firing them into the now completely stationary side of the Yoshino. Both torps find their mark, and Yoshino erupts in another massive explosion. And in a much more somber moment, this was one of the troop transports, and of her 5,000 soldiers on board, she took 2,442 with her. But at the same time, it had to be done. So finally, her last sunken vessel claimed, Ramage orders a disengage from the brawl.
Oh, man.
They put a full steam ahead, pull off from the escort vessels, and once safely far enough away, they sink beneath the waves. All in all, from the time of the first torpedoes being fired to the last torpedoes, 34 minutes had passed.
Dear Lord. I could see the little green timer when people are speedrunning in the corner. Little Ramage is doing this.
Oh, man. But in those 34 minutes, and I thought this was pretty fitting, they sunk a total of 34,300 tons of enemy vessels. So just north of 1,000 tons sunk per minute.
Oh dear. So it was the two tankers,
and one of the troop transports.
And one of the troop transports.
Yeah, 34,300 tons in 34 minutes. With, not to mention, Steelhead claimed another 14,700. So a pretty massively successful run, all things considered.
And how would they do the tonnage? Like, would it be the oil tanker while it was laden, or?
I think so. It was effectively like assuming full sort of load and everything. How much did you sink? Which, granted, I saw a little bit about this, but there was like a joint thing between like the Axis powers and the Allies after the war that tried to like get the records correct. And the amended records post-war were significantly less in tonnage. But I also wonder how much, how accurate those are. Because, if you're the Axis and you just got your ass beat, are you... Even in like small things like that, you're probably going to be like, oh yeah, that wasn't that big a deal. It was only this many tons.
Yeah.
But anyway, Commander Ramage would go on to actually get a... this is going to be a bit of a shorter episode now, I'm realizing. But Ramage would go on to receive the Medal of Honor for Ramage's Rampage, and in general was kind of a hero of the U.S. submarine force. Though granted, being the gentleman that he was, Ramage dedicated the medal to his crew and made each of them their own certificates, so that they could show that they were a part of the events known as Ramage's Rampage.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I thought that was a really nice gesture, that he was effectively like, I mean, yeah, like I was commanding, but none of this would have happened if like the guys under me weren't busting their ass.
Yeah, so. And just that specific example of his helmsman disobeying orders to get the fuck out of there.
Right. Well, and I also thought that it was kind of interesting because there's like a ton of footage of like him basically getting to meet FDR, and just like what a weird experience that must have been. Like literally you go through 34 minutes of just like probably the highest adrenaline you will ever have in your entire life.
Yeah.
In those 34 minutes, rocket to like near the top of total tonnage for the entire war. And then come home and they're like, yeah, the president wants to meet you. And you're also the only dude at this point who was awarded the Medal of Honor in the submarine force who's still alive.
Yeah.
Like, there were only 2 people who got it before him, and both of them, it was awarded posthumously. So, to do all of that and to come out alive is something else. But yeah, he lived, I think, into his 90s past then, so he was around for quite some time post-war.
That seems like a thing, right? Like people who go through absolutely insane shit somehow live to be super old. I don't know. It seems like it should be the opposite, but
yeah. I mean, I guess like my grandpa didn't live to be super old, but I don't know. He didn't have the healthiest lifestyle. So,
yeah.
But for those who don't know, he fought in World War II, lived to be 86, I believe. So it's still got to a very respectable age. But he was on the army side of things, so we probably won't be talking about his exploits.
Yeah. Isn't the other Medal of Honor for I guess that wouldn't be submarine warfare. Because there was the one guy from U-505 that came aboard the U-boat and plugged the hole.
Did he get the Medal of Honor for that?
Yeah, he did.
Oh, shit. Okay. Wow.
But I guess he wasn't strictly a crew member of a sub. He was from a destroyer.
Right. Would have fallen under the Navy.
Yeah.
But like literally all of the World War II Medal of Honor reports are absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Like, what was it? The one dude who basically like held a hill entirely by himself with a modified Browning machine gun. Like, just insane stuff. Like taking anti-personnel mines, slapping them to arm them, and then tossing them like frisbees.
Oh, wow.
Like insane shit. But no, the Pacific in particular actually has like a lot of submarine warfare from the US's side, which I thought was kind of interesting because I really had not heard much about like submarine warfare outside of like the U-boats and like what a massive pain in the ass they were for England getting supplies. But no, I'd never really considered like how big of a role the US submarines played in just like making Japan's life a living hell.
Yeah, and as we learned from the past episode, I guess the US put all their submarine eggs into the Pacific basket because they really didn't have any on the Atlantic coast.
Right. No, and that was the thing too. There's a couple other events that I would like for us to discuss for our subathon, and so I thought that I would actually kind of pitch them to you now and to our listeners so that you guys can have a bit of a vote on what the next topic's going to be. One of which is the story of a U.S. submarine that sank a single vessel, and by sinking that vessel was on the top of the tonnage charts for all of World War II.
Oh.
And also the Churchill-class submarine that was involved in the Falklands conflict. So jumping out of World War II for a bit and taking a trip to the 80s and just sort of... It's an interesting one. To just give a bit of insight on it, it created international uproar in its use because it fired on a vessel outside of the military exclusion zone. But interesting stuff overall. Do you have feelings one way or the other, Jack?
I want to know. I want to know what kind of ship this one U.S. sub sank. Like, what was this thing that was so massive that interests me.
Okay. Well, listeners, we have one vote for World War II continues. But let us know in the comments, and, as the YouTube algorithm dictates, like and subscribe if you're on that platform, but otherwise, follow the podcast. Keep tuned in.
All hail the algorithm.
All hail the algorithm. And, we look forward to talking to you guys more about subs during our subathon.
Yeah.
Well, and with that, do we want to talk about things outside of the realm of naval history?
I think that's a great idea.
All right. What have you got going on in your life, Jack?
This past Sunday morning, the short version of this story is don't buy a house.
Oh no.
I woke up Monday morning to the sound of gurgling water and like dripping, and
oh no,
coming from like around the house. I'm like, oh no, and I'm running around the house in my underwear trying to figure out what's going on, and thankfully it was water draining out of my radiators, and like it was leaking out onto the leaking out onto the basement floor. So, and it wasn't a whole ton of water. So the pump on the boiler has died, and it died at a pretty good time in April. I won't be needing it much anymore, but
right. You can postpone getting a new one for a bit if you need to.
Yeah. But yeah, the skinny of it is don't buy a house.
Dude, your house has had so many problems already. I feel bad.
No, it really hasn't. It's been okay. But
I mean, have you told the story on here of the
poop
geyser
basement? The geyser of toilet water in the apparently
like what it was like a main pipe, the threading on like one of the things just gave.
The cap that was on like the Y joint in the main sewer stack, the pipe was so corroded that the threads were just gone and the cap just came off. So when there was sufficient poo pressure to dislodge the cap, it did so.
Oh god, I just remember you texting our group chat being like, hey guys, sorry I can't make it tonight, there is currently shit flooding into my basement.
Yeah.
I was like, oh no.
No, it turned out okay.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and I'm glad this one's kind of it's an issue for sure, but it's not an imminent one.
Yeah.
Well,
so what's going on with you?
I have a few things I could talk about, really. I've been playing this game on Steam called Crab Champions. It's like one dude made a third-person shooter, like movement-based roguelike, and it's really good, but it's all of the assets and like everything is themed around just crab rave. So it's like marimba electronic music as the background tracks, and you're just a crab with a gun shooting other crabs and monster things. It's really good, and it's like $10, so pick it up if you're feeling like it. But
if you're a fan of Earth Defense Force, it kind of gives those vibes.
Oh, definitely. No, it's. I think I showed Jack a little bit of me playing it a few days ago, but the cluster launcher with the right perks just blots out the sun. So, oh goodness. But I have also gotten back into Magic: The Gathering, which Jack and I played quite a bit in college, and it's a fun game. The most recent set that came out, well, it comes out today actually, or time of recording, excuse me, is March of the Machine, and it has some pre-constructed decks that are really neat. If you don't know Magic, then I guess you just don't care, but it's a good game. So that's kind of been it for me. That and my wife and I have been buying a shitload of plants. So planting it up.
Real plant hours.
Real plant hours. We also accidentally bought 3 birds of paradise, which, for those not in the know about plants, grow to be absolutely fucking massive. Because we bought 1 pot and it turned out to be 3 plants in 1 pot. And I was like, well, they're probably not going to do well if we keep all 3 of them in the same pot. So we separated them out, and they're already getting huge. So
that's fun.
Don't know what I'm going to do with the 2 that I did not intend to buy. So we'll see.
Nice. Well,
all right.
I would like to thank Colin Drown at Colin_Drawn for our lovely cover art. And I would like to thank Joe Koziak for mixing and mastering the intro and outro music.
Hell yeah, brother. Thank you all for tuning in to the Salty Siren Naval History Podcast. This has been your host, David Bradbury, and
Jack McFarling.
And we will see you in the coming weeks for more Subathon.
Oh, Johnny, Johnny, call and hear the ancient song of sailors long forgone and sailors still to be. A sweet and solemn tune spoke gently by the tide. Oh, Johnny, Johnny, fall, join the song.